Hello viewers, welcome back. In this video we will discuss about the air regulations. We'll start with the Chicago Convention, which established ICAO and sets the foundation for international aviation regulations. We will also cover important international regulations, various ICAO annexes, provisions of procedures for navigation, air traffic service standards. We'll also review CAR's important sections, which are critical to compliance with national aviation regulations, and discuss how national laws differ from relevant ICAO annexes and CARs.
In the early 20th century, aviation was in its infancy, and nations were grappling with the implications of this new mode of transportation. One significant incident that highlighted the need for international air law occurred in 1908, when at least 10 German balloons allegedly crossed the Franco-German border and landed on French soil. These balloons carried more than 26 aviators, the majority of whom were German officers. This event raised concerns about national security, sovereignty, and the potential for international conflict arising from unregulated airspace.
To avoid international confrontation and address the issue of unregulated airspace, the French government proposed an international conference. The purpose of this conference was to devise regulatory procedures relating to flights into and over foreign territory. The idea was to create a framework that would prevent such incidents and ensure that air navigation could be conducted safely and without infringing on national sovereignty.
As a result, on the invitation of France, the first important conference on an international air law code was convened in Paris in 1910, named International Air Navigation Conference. The 1910 Paris International Air Navigation Conference represented the first diplomatic effort to formulate the principles of international law relating to air navigation, and was of great historical importance. 19 European states attended this conference. Nations from other continents were not invited. Given the distances involved, the prospect of their aircraft operating in Europe was considered unrealistic.
This draft international convention discussed about nationality of aircraft and registration requirements, approval and airworthiness certificates, authorization for air traffic within the borders and above a national territory. This conference was a failure, as no government took action on the ratification of the convention. States could not agree whether airspace should be open to all, or whether states have sovereignty over airspace.
Imagine the world in the early 20th century, a time of groundbreaking technological advancements. The marvel of human flight is no longer a dream but a reality. Airplanes, once mere inventions, now soar through the skies, connecting distant lands and bringing people closer. However, with this new mode of transport comes the need for rules and regulations to ensure safety and order. Recognizing this necessity, nations come together to address the challenges of international air navigation. This sets the stage for a historic gathering in Paris, where the 1919 Paris Convention on Aerial Navigation is about to take flight.
In the bustling city of Paris, representatives from 27 countries gather in October 1919. They come with a shared goal: to establish international norms for air navigation. This gathering marks the birth of the first international treaty focused on aviation.
The representatives agree on a fundamental principle: each country has sovereignty over its own airspace. This means no foreign aircraft can fly over a country's territory without permission. It's a crucial step in ensuring national security and respecting territorial boundaries.
While asserting sovereignty, the convention also promotes cooperation. Countries agree to grant innocent passage to each other's aircraft, fostering international travel and commerce. This balance of control and freedom lays the foundation for a collaborative global aviation system.
To ensure safe skies, the convention mandates that all aircraft must be registered and have a certificate of airworthiness. Pilots and crew members must be properly licensed and competent. These measures are essential to prevent accidents and build trust in international air travel. The skies are primarily used for military purposes. As the war nears its end, there's a growing vision for a peaceful, connected world through aviation. In November 1944, delegates from 52 countries gather in Chicago with a mission to establish a framework for global aviation. Amid the backdrop of war, representatives from around the globe meet in Chicago from November 1 to December 7, 1944. Their goal: to create an international body that will oversee the growth and regulation of civil aviation. A key outcome of the convention is the establishment of the International Civil Aviation Organization. ICAO is tasked with creating and enforcing international aviation standards, this organization becomes a cornerstone for safe, efficient, and sustainable aviation worldwide. ICAO standards and recommended practices for each area of ICAO responsibility are contained in 19 annexes. Each annex deals with a particular subject area. Annex 2, 5, 7, 8 are standards to be followed uniformly worldwide, whereas other annexes contains both standards recommended practices. Alongside the convention, two key agreements are signed, the International Air Transit Agreement and the International Air Transport Agreement. The Chicago Convention's accomplished air transit agreement that include an agreement by the signatories to grant each other two of the so-called 5 freedoms of air transport: first, freedom of peaceful transit; second, freedom of non-traffic stop to refuel, repair, or refuge. Similarly, this convention accomplished the International Air Transport Agreement, which established 3 commercial freedoms in addition to the freedoms included in the Transit Agreement: third, freedom to take traffic from the homeland to any country; fourth, freedom to bring traffic from any country to the homeland; 50, freedom to pick up and discharge traffic at intermediate points. The Chicago Convention has a lasting legacy, shaping the future of international civil aviation.
The Rome Convention was developed to provide internationally harmonious arrangements to ensure adequate compensation for persons who suffer damage caused on the ground by foreign aircraft, while limiting the extent of the liabilities incurred for such damage in order not to hinder the development of international civil air transport. The primary purpose of the Rome Convention of 1952 is to provide compensation for surface damage caused by foreign aircraft. The operator of the aircraft is primarily liable for damage caused by an aircraft. Deliberate act or omission done with intent to cause damage could result in unlimited liability. No liability for damage resulting from armed conflict, civil disturbance, or public authority actions. Priority given to personal injury and loss of life claims over property damage. Requirement for operators to have insurance or equivalent security.
The Tokyo Convention of 1963, Convention on Offenses and Certain Other Acts Committed on Board Aircraft. To protect the safety of aircraft and persons on board, and to maintain good order and discipline during flight, it does not apply to state aircraft, for example, aircraft used in military, customs and police services. First International Treaty to Address Crimes and Other Acts on Board Aircraft, provides a legal framework for dealing with offenses on board, enhancing aviation safety. Aircraft commander is authorized to impose measures to prevent offenses. He can disembark offenders and deliver them to competent authorities. This convention protects the aircraft commander, crew, and assisting passengers from legal proceedings for actions taken to maintain order and safety in flight against the disruptive passenger. The state of registration of the aircraft is competent to exercise jurisdiction over offenses and acts committed on board.
There were an increase in cases of hijacking in the early 1960s, therefore, it was evident that there was a dire need for international laws that regulated aerial hijacking. The Hague Convention deals with the suppression of unlawful seizure of aircraft. Convention defines the act of unlawful seizure of aircraft and lists which contracting states have undertaken to make such offenses punishable by severe penalties. The Hague Convention aimed to suppress terrorist attacks on civil aircraft by punishing the act of unlawful seizure of an aircraft. It recognized hijacking as a separate offense, with punishment as severe as capital punishment. The Hague Convention obligates its members to either prosecute or extradite offenders guilty of hijacking.
Montreal Convention for the Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against the Safety of Civil Aviation. The convention deals with acts other than those covered by the Tokyo and the Hague Conventions. The Montreal Convention defines a wide spectrum of unlawful acts against the safety of civil aviation, and the contracting states have undertaken to make these offenses punishable by severe penalties. It makes it an offense to attempt any of the unlawful acts against the person who acts violently on board an aircraft, or who destroys or damages an aircraft in service, or who places a bomb or similar device on board an aircraft, or who destroys or damages a navigation aid or interferes with operation, or who passes false information, thus endangering an aircraft's safety.
The Warsaw Convention is one of the most widely adhered and litigated treaties in the world. Originally signed in 1929 in Warsaw, it was amended in 1955 at The Hague, Netherlands. Finally, the Montreal Convention, signed in 1999, replaced the Warsaw Convention. The primary objectives of the Montreal Convention are to provide for equitable compensation for death or injury to passengers, and damage to baggage and cargo that occur in international air carriage, to facilitate the efficient operation of international carriage by air of passengers, baggage and cargo.
ICAO Aviation Security Plan. In response to the 9/11 attacks, ICAO developed and implemented a global aviation security plan to enhance security measures in civil aviation. ICAO Assembly adopted resolution for declaration on misuse of civil aircraft as weapons of destruction and other terrorist acts involving civil aviation. This resolution directed the ICAO Council and the Secretary-General to consider the establishment of an audit program relating to airport security arrangements and civil aviation security programs.
Let's summarize the aviation laws. Primary reason for the French government to convene the 1910 International Air Navigation Conference, to regulate peaceful but unregulated international flights. Airspace sovereignty and navigation rights aspect of aviation was particularly emphasized in the regulations discussed during the 1910 conference. The legal status of airspace above a state aspect of the 1910 conference directly influenced later international aviation agreements, such as the Paris Convention of 1919 and the Chicago Convention of 1944. Political disagreements among states was the one of major reason for the failure of the 1910 conference to achieve all its goals, despite significant agreements. The 1910 International Air Navigation Conference is considered a precursor to International Civil Aviation Organization. One of the main objectives of the 1919 Paris Convention on Aerial Navigation was to regulate international air navigation. Each country has complete sovereignty over its airspace, was the principle which was established regarding airspace in the 1919 Paris Convention. A certificate of airworthiness was required for an aircraft to operate under the 1919 Paris Convention. As per 1919 Paris Convention, pilots and crew must be licensed and competent. The primary purpose of the 1944 Chicago Convention on International Civil Aviation is to establish a framework for global civil aviation. International Civil Aviation Organization was established as a result of the Chicago Convention. As per the Chicago Convention, the contracting states recognize that every state has complete and exclusive sovereignty over the airspace above its territory. The ICAO annexes represent a cornerstone of global civil aviation regulation, providing a comprehensive framework of standards and recommended practices to ensure air transportation safety, security, and efficiency worldwide.
The primary purpose of the Rome Convention of 1952, to provide compensation for surface damage caused by foreign aircraft. Under the Rome Convention, the operator of the aircraft is primarily liable for damage caused by an aircraft. If the person who suffers damage proves that it was caused by a deliberate act or omission of the operator, done with intent to cause damage, the liability of the operator shall be unlimited. The primary purpose of the Tokyo Convention of 1963, to address crimes and acts on board aircraft. The Tokyo Convention, the Hague Convention, the Montreal Convention does not apply to aircraft used in military, customs or police services. As per the Tokyo Convention, the state of registration of the aircraft has primary jurisdiction over offenses committed on board an aircraft. As per the Tokyo Convention, the commander may exercise the power to disembark a person if it is necessary to protect the safety of the aircraft or of persons or property on board, or to maintain good order and discipline, if he or she has reasonable grounds to believe that the person has committed, or is about to commit, an act which may or does jeopardize the safety of the aircraft or persons or cargo on board, or good order and discipline. The Hague Hijacking Convention, formerly the Convention for the Suppression of Unlawful Seizure of Aircraft, is a multilateral treaty by which states agree to prohibit and punish aircraft hijacking. Montreal Convention 1971, for the suppression of unlawful acts against the safety of civil aviation. It makes it an offense to attempt any of the unlawful acts against the person who acts violently on board an aircraft or who destroys or damages an aircraft in service.
The primary objectives of the Montreal Convention 1999 to provide for equitable compensation for death or injury to passengers, and damage to baggage and cargo, that occur in international air carriage. to facilitate the efficient operation of international carriage by air of passengers, baggage and cargo. So, we have come to the end of our journey through the key international air laws. Thank you for your attention and stay tuned for our next update.